Hello, welcome to this episode of the Martial Truth Podcast, my interview with Professor Gregory Smits. Professor Smits is the author of the Ryukyu Islands, A New History from the Stone Age to the Present, along with several other books on the history of the Ryukyu Islands, which those of us that do martial arts, Okinawa being an important one, but there's many islands there. And it first came to my attention a few weeks ago when the book came out, and a few other people mentioned it. And then I came across another article he had written, and I was like, wow, this is a guy I'd really like to talk to. And he was nice enough to consent to come on. And I think he's going to really open a lot of eyes into what the real history of Okinawa and the Ryukyu Islands is. We have this kind of fantasy idea of what it was. And yeah, it's something completely different. So this podcast will be an important one for people that are into the history of martial arts and the history of Okinawa. He's in the process of writing another book, so hopefully we'll get another visit from him in the future. But this was, I was thrilled. I felt like, I was learning so much. So hopefully you guys will feel the same way. So as always, please click that like, share, and subscribe button. Consider becoming a monthly member. While you're watching this, I'll be in New York assisting my Taiji master Chen Jianghua with his New York workshop at my old school, Seishinkan East. So, again, here's my interview with Gregory Smits. Professor Gregory Smits, welcome to the Martial Truth Podcast. Gregory Smits is the author of this new book, The Ryukyu Islands, A New History from the Stone Age to the Present, which I think helps dispel a lot of myths. I'm just into it now. Just even the first section, which is about the myths of, history within the Ryukyus, fascinating stuff. And I'm sure as I go into it, there'll be a lot of head shaking and a lot of, oh, okay, right? So, Greg, why don't you, tell us about yourself, your background, why so much interest in the Ryukyus?
Okay, yeah. So actually, that I'm often asked, why are you so interested in the Ryukyu Islands? And I can't really give a good answer because the
Right.
people say, "Oh, you must have been there in the military." No, you must have, Did you? I actually did practice martial arts as a undergraduate in college.
Okay.
Ishin, I believe that's the same as your
Okay.
main style. But that's not what really motivated me, although it did introduce into my mind just the Okinawa and the
Right.
Ryukyu Islands and so forth. And then in those days, I also encountered the same very fluffy kinds of things. The island where everyone's painting hummingbird eggs and is peaceful, and so,
Right.
okay. And so uh, anyway, as an undergraduate, I majored in history and I minored in Asian studies, and I studied Japanese languages. Only 2 years was available. I went to the University of Florida. I grew up near Atlanta, and I just thought I would get away from home, go down south where it's even warmer because Atlanta is such a cold place, and just the one thing leads to another. So by the time I'm finished, I worked for a year, and then I decided, yeah, I'll go to Japan and worked there for a year, and then I went back to graduate school. This time at Hawaii, and then went back to Japan, and all this time I'm interested in a number of different things about Japanese history and Japanese culture, but the Ryukyu Islands were part of that. And I ended up writing my first book, which came out in 1999, on the Ryukyu Islands. It's called Visions of Ryukyu. Actually, I should have brought a copy of it here to hold up, but anyway, it's my first book, and it's a good. I still it's held up well. It's been translated into Japanese, but if I could rewrite it, I would rewrite the first and last chapters and contextualize it much differently
Okay.
based on this, the fact that now I understand a much broader sweep of Ryukyuan history well. Um, and so after that book, I kept working on Ryukyu for a little while, but then I got tired of it. I just had been doing it for so long, and I've completely switched gears to earthquakes. So I wrote a
Okay.
couple of books on earthquakes in Japan and the history of seismology. And then I teamed up with a geophysicist, and we teach a course on earthquakes here at Penn State. So that was my earthquake phase.
Okay.
Um, and then I got tired of that. around 2015 or so, I was on sabbatical and decided, let me go back and look at what's been done in Ryukyuan history with the idea. So yeah, let me make sure I got the dates. Yeah, around 2016, I was going to write a general history sort of like this, but I said, the early material never adds up. It's never made any sense. Let me just see what's work's been done since I've, the last 10 years approximately. Well, since I've been working on earthquakes. Well, the work, there was amazing interdisciplinary work that had been done, which I remember one night just staying up all night. I couldn't stop reading. So all my attention shifted to the early period meaning through the 1500s or so, but and several hundred years before that. And there really aren't any written records that directly address that era. This is what many people don't quite realize. They say, well, what about those official histories? Well, the official histories of the Ryukyu kingdom were written between 1650 and 1750, and they reflect the issues of that time, and they have all sorts of biases built into them, and including real basic things like Ryukyuan history and culture started in southern Okinawa. We know that's completely wrong, but in the meantime, archaeologists have been digging up all kinds of amazing things, and multidisciplinary scholars have taken the archaeological work. They've brought in mythology and legends. They've looked at shipping patterns and all kinds of material brought in. Then all the incidental written records, like the records from China and Korea that mention the Ryukyu Islands, combine all this stuff together to create a fascinating story of early Ryukyu that basically revolves around pirates, wako, the so-called Japanese pirates. They're more than just pirates. In those days, if you're a merchant, there wasn't much difference between a merchant who sails with an armed crew, and if they can grab something, they might do it, versus pirates who often operated as merchants. They grab something over here and sell it over there. So that I just completely abandoned earthquakes and said, this new Ryukyu and early Ryukyuan history is fascinating. And so this book came out in 2018 and 19, right on the edge. So Maritime Ryukyu, and that was my initial work after getting back into Ryukyuan history. And in here, there's a bunch of open questions where I'll say, this is still up for grabs. We don't really know much about it. I might speculate maybe this or maybe that, but there's about 10 to 12 major questions. Well, I kept working on those and reading more and thinking more and making flow charts and so forth. And the result was an even larger follow-up book, Early Ryukyuan History, A New Model, which came out about a year and a half ago, and doesn't overlap that much. It's really, you can read these two as a pair.
Okay.
Volume 1, Volume 2. And this is really dense. I mean, this is hard going reading. It's for specialists. But so then at that point, I felt like I was ready to write the general history. I had been working, I knew a lot about the 17th and 18th, 19th centuries, even the early 20th century, and it all had fallen together. And so that's this one. In the title, I'd put From the Stone Age to 2024, because I wanted people to know when the present was, but that doesn't sound good as a title. So it reflects, up till about 2023. And all kinds of interesting new stuff has come out just in the last 6 months. So I wish I could have gotten that in the book, but anyway,
so it's interesting. You talk about the pirates, and people don't realize that how that influenced things. Like in terms of even the martial arts, like Andreas Quast, who's a martial arts historian, wrote a book, Karate 1.0, and he mentioned he has lists of what was in the armories of the Ryukyu Kingdom. And, I know for some of my martial arts friends, they see guns in the armories and they're like, what do you mean guns? Like, why would you need guns? But to repel pirates. I mean, there's nothing better than, using a gun to repel pirates as they're trying to board your ship and steal your cargo. So it's just interesting, how something like the pirates could have an effect on how the Okinawans had to protect themselves.
Yes. And but even more, perhaps more radically, um, the there's a tendency to use to regard Okinawans and pirates as two separate groups. But if you make a Venn diagram, there's going to be a huge overlap at up to a certain point in time. So the that's why one of the sections of this book is from Wako to kings.
Okay.
These early people who appear as kings in the official histories were either Wako's or constantly worked with Wako because they're, for example, whenever they would authorize a shipment to Korea, it always contains a bunch of Korean rescued Koreans who have been rescued from pirates. Well, what are we doing, sailing around rescuing Koreans? No, the port of Naha was a huge slave market well into the 16th century. And so, but during the 16th century, there is a significant transition where Ryukyu becomes a centralized state. And what date? Roughly 1520 to 30. It's not some instant thing. It
Right.
starts with warfare in 1500, and it is pretty much complete by about 1530. And as I like to emphasize, it's an empire. It's a maritime empire with Shuri as its capital, because the forces of mostly the King Shoshin go out and conquer the other Ryukyu Islands, starting in 1500 with a very dramatic invasion of the southern Ryukyu Islands. And some of those have to be reconquered as time goes on in the 1530s and even later, because they don't like being conquered. They get
Right.
nothing out of it other than
Right.
they have to pay a bunch of stuff to tribute to Shuri. And so one of the things I like to emphasize is that the Ryukyu Islands does not equal Okinawa. Okinawa is the
Right.
biggest of them. It's the one that conquered the others. But and there are some general cultural characteristics across the islands, but not as many as you might think. For example, each major Ryukyu Island group, the Yaeyama Islands, the Miyako Islands, Okinawa, the Northern Ryukyu Islands, have entirely separate origin myths. So they all sort of resemble the Japanese origin myths,
Right.
that it's a solar deity, but the name of the deity is different. All the details are different. The names of all the local deities are different. It's just a different myth.
And also, isn't it? I mean, language. There's
Yes.
differences in the language from
Oh,
island to
yes.
island. I mean,
Yes.
even within the martial arts world, like the one weapon we have, certain parts of Okinawa, it's called tonkwa. Other parts, it's called tuifa, right?
Yes.
And it's a dialect or whatever. So even the language wasn't 100% the same all over the different islands, right?
Oh, yeah. It was mutually unintelligible at a certain point. Well, it's really tricky to get to kind of do the timing of it. So they're all the languages of the Ryukyu Islands are Japonic and related to this broader Japanese family. But if we were to take the languages that came to have evolved by let's say the beginning of the 20th century, or even now, um, the language of Miyako-jima in the southern Ryukyu Islands cannot be understood across the little expanse of ocean in Ishigaki in Yaeyama. And Ishigaki language cannot be understood in Yonaguni, the furthest of the Ryukyu Islands. None of those can be understood in Okinawa. But even in Okinawa, there's a huge difference between Shuri aristocratic Okinawan, the Okinawan of the Naha port, and even a bigger difference between the northern Nakijin area Okinawan, which we have some actual documents from the 1700s in which royal officials go up to northern Okinawa because there's a mysterious ship whose sailors, the local officials can't understand their language, but the royal officials who go up there report that no, we can't understand their language on the ship, nor can we understand what anyone here in Nakajin is telling us.
Okay.
So that is because it was so relatively isolated
Right.
in the sense that there's no interior roads or anything. It's all ships going from port to port to port. And after 1620 or so, that ship traffic all across the Japanese islands gets essentially stopped, greatly reduced, and individual communities just develop their own languages in relative isolation. So yeah, huge differences between the Ryukyuan languages, even though it is appropriate to call them Ryukyuan languages. In other words, they have some general
Right.
characteristics that,
Well, I've had a friend. I had a friend who lived on Okinawa for a while, and he taught English there. And he was translating for us with one of my Japanese sword teachers that came in. And as soon as he started to talk to him in Japanese, my sword teacher made a comment. He says, "Oh, you have like basically an Okinawan accent." Like
yes,
just the way he spoke the language was different from like the mainland Japanese. And this is only a few years ago, right?
yeah,
So you still see there's that difference, but it's the same thing. If you go, look, if you go to a certain parts of a state, if you go upstate New York, people sound a little different from the people in New York City. So,
yes.
it's just the normal way of things.
Exactly. Yeah, that and this word normal is crucial here. This is one of the things I like to say is like, this place is normal. In other
Right.
words, the language situation is exactly what you would expect given the historical, situation and the dispersal of people. Subtle distinctions in language are extremely common, like you just mentioned for New York, or when I was living in northern Kumamoto Prefecture for a while, people would tell me, "Oh yeah, we can tell someone's from Nankan, which is a little town just down the road, versus if they're from this other, from I can't remember the name of the other one now. Yeah, it's just very they say this word a little different, say that word a little different, and so yeah, I mean that's just how it is all over the world, and of course people are motivated all over the world by pretty much the same basic set of impulses, and so yeah, one of the things I like to emphasize.
So Okinawa, was it there were three kingdoms? Were there three primary kingdoms, and then eventually the one basically took over the other two, and that's what kind of, I don't know if unified is the right word or conquered, however you want to look at it, right?
Yeah, that's the official story,
Okay.
and that's the official story that you get in the 1650 work, the official history called Chuzan Seikon, which is often translated as Mirror of Chuzan or Mirrors of, it has the word mirror in it of some or reflections in it. Um, and that's pretty much the same story you're going to get in Chuzan Seifu, which is the later official history, but they don't agree on the dates or in many other
Okay.
details. So already that's a little bit odd, and they can't really tell you when the so-called three kingdoms ever got started. They say it's during the reign of King Tamagusku, but his official reign is quite a long period, so somewhere in there, so they
Okay.
say. It seems to be way too early, though. We're talking about mid 1300s. Um, so one of the things I argued in Maritime Ryukyu is that this just doesn't add up. This
Right.
idea there were three little kingdoms. Um, there are so many problems with the idea. Um, and then in the follow-up book, I say, okay, I agree that it doesn't add up, but now let me tell you instead of saying this is what it wasn't, let me now try to say what it was. Um, so the if, all right, so the sort of the heyday of these three little kingdoms, according to the official histories, is the late 1300s into the 1400s, and by 1429 at the latest, they've all been conquered by Chuzan. Again, the official story, and it's clash of armies where
Right.
one conquers the other in these battles and dramatic battles that follow the exact script of the classic Japanese war stories. Um, so, but I don't think so. I don't think they existed. It is true that in the official Chinese records, you have king of Chuzan sending shipments, king of Sannan, king of Sanhoku Sannan, and so forth. But these seem to be essentially like dummy corporations
Okay.
to enable. So all the shipments from these kings of these various little kingdoms go through the port of Naha. They never are shipped from any other port. They all go on the same Chinese ships, actual Chinese ships that have been given to these Ryukyuan kings, but are actually still run by Chinese merchants who handle all the paperwork. And it seems to be some sort of a way of bringing in more of these essentially pirates based in the Naha area and around Okinawa to bring them into peaceful trade, or mostly peaceful. There's all kinds of problems when these guys go over to China and start raising hell, but to bring them into this lawful Chinese trade system by giving them a really good deal. We'll provide the ships. We'll take care of all the paperwork. You guys just give us some stuff, and we'll give you. You can go over to China, 60 or so of you, and trade to your heart's content over there, and make money. And so it's basically buying off the pirates that are based in Okinawa and probably other Ryukyu Islands to some extent, but mostly Okinawa at this point, and bringing them into this Chinese system, and apparently having multiple kings. It's what probably happened is in Okinawa, when one of these little kings gets, essentially the title king really means license to trade with China.
Right.
One of them, gets this, says, I got a license to trade with China. Someone else says, hey, I'm a king too over here. I'm a king over here. This actually happens in other places with the Ming Dynasty. In the little Sultanate of Sulu, someone calling himself a king of Sulu sends some incredibly poor quality items, including a pot of soil from Sulu, to the Ming Dynasty. The Ming Dynasty sends them back all this great stuff, and all of a sudden 2 more kings pop up. They have a king of the east, center, and west, whereas in Okinawa it's a king of the north, middle, and south.
Right.
But even in the kings of the south, there's actually 2 different lines, so it's 4 different royal lines, as well as a bunch of people saying, well, I'm the uncle of this guy over here. So all these supposed relatives are jumping in on it, and it's this confused welter of trade, but also competition within Okinawa. There's all this warfare to.
So it sounds to me like basically it's merchants that get this thing where they can go to China and make money.
Yes.
And it's almost now they want to make themselves appear to be a big dog. So they give themselves this title or claim this title or whatever. But there's how much succession is there in Okinawa, in the history of Okinawa, amongst these so-called kings? Like obviously in Britain, we can see and follow a clear succession, right? But do we have that clear succession in Okinawa, or is it more kind of loosey-goosey,
Loosey-goosey.
Okay.
Yeah. So the official histories brought a bunch of these people together and made them into a line of kings, father to son. But when you actually look and dig into the details, insofar as we can date some of these people with precision, you have sons who are older than their fathers.
Okay.
It is absolutely the first. Okay, so the first Shou dynasty was not a dynasty. It was just this collection of these wako, basically, most of them who some merchants / pirates who have been brought into the Chinese system. And the Chinese, part of the problem is the Chinese terminology. So the Chinese term that is Wang, and it's always translated as king. And that's a reasonable translation in many cases. But from the Chinese court's perspective, yeah, I mean, it indicated a locally powerful person with whom we're going to agree to do state-to-state trade. State meaning it could just be a very small little territory. So sometimes people say, yeah, okay, so in Okinawa we'll call them princes, which is perhaps a little better, but still it's a little misleading. So in this book I coined the term trade kings. To qualify them is that they're not monarchs who are the heads of some kind of bureaucracy. They are local pirate leaders / merchants who take this title of king from and then do business with China, and eventually the Chinese court is trying to co-opt them so that they can start then reducing how good the terms are as these people get dependent on China for trade, and that is in fact exactly what happens.
And what was China benefiting from the trade with Okinawa? Was it a specific crop? Was it something else? What did they want from the Ryukyus?
Yeah. Okay, so the most basic benefit was a reduction in pirate attacks. So the first Ming emperor was obsessed with the pirate problem. It wasn't so bad on the China coast, although it was getting worse, but it was especially bad in Korea. So these Japanese-based pirates, many of whom were themselves Koreans, because they knew exactly where to go, based in Kyushu mostly, would attack Korea and just ravage the coast. Before it took decades for the Koreans to figure out how to defend against that. Eventually they do. But they also the Koreans adopt a policy of paying these folks off. It's like, if we give them good enough trade terms, they'll just come and trade instead of raid. There's some balance there. If we build up our defenses so it's more militarily costly, and then we give them, we can give them good enough terms that are not so, they're not going to bankrupt us. So that'll go on in Korea pretty much in concert with and perhaps inspired by the first Ming emperor. Okay, so the Ming dynasty is created in 1368. So 1370s onward, exactly during this so-called Three Kingdoms era. So the most basic thing is these people are going to come to China lawfully, sort of.
Right.
When they get to China, they cause all kinds of problems, which is fascinating. And in Maritime Ryukyu, I talk about that a lot, including arson, murder, and that's what happens when you bring a bunch of pirates over.
Right.
And plus, totally abusing the systems. Like, you're allowed to bring 50 people. It's like, well, we brought 200. I hope you don't mind. We're here. And and then the Chinese records, the local people are going. It's like, hey, there's 200 of them. We can't. And the higher ups are going, just deal with it. Come on, So,
it's easy for the higher ups because they're not the ones dealing with it.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. So that's the most basic thing. But then there are certain specific things that are highly desired in China, which these Ryukyu-based and Ryukyu-based traders, raiders can provide. And perhaps first and foremost are swords from Japan. So Japanese blades. Those were often modified in Okinawa to be wielded with one hand instead of two.
Okay.
But yeah, so that's another item is horses. Now you might, well, where do the horses come from? Well, these Wako pirates were experts at raising and transporting horses. In fact, they in Korea could land cavalry forces and attack far inland because of that.
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't realize that there was a lot of transportation of horses via ship in these ancient times. They think, oh no, they just rounded up a bunch of horses on wherever they were. No, they were actually bringing horses on these ships to utilize them for whatever reason they were utilizing them for.
Yeah, exactly. And so the northern Ryukyu island of Okinoe-Rabu was a major horse pasture, and there were also some others in the region outside, just close by. And so these one of the first things that the Ming Chinese traders do around 1370 or 71, I forgot the exact date, but right in there, they arranged for this massive purchase of horses. Well, how could they just show up at this early date and buy hundreds of head of horses if it wasn't already a very well established trade?
Right.
And these people were experts at, because putting that many horses on, of course you can't put that many on one ship, but just packing them
Right.
into a ship and having them not die and everything is a really difficult thing.
Right.
So yeah, horses and swords, in part because the Ming Dynasty is still fighting the Mongols, even though they've driven them out of the main area of China. Sulfur, this is a huge one because China has sulfur deposits, but, and don't ask me now the chemical details, I've forgotten them, but at one time I read a technical article on this matter. The type of sulfur found in most parts of China has to be processed much more heavily before it can be used in gunpowder manufacture, whereas the Japanese sulfur is pretty much ready to use as is. So these folks transported huge amounts of sulfur, both from some obscure parts of the Ryukyu Islands, like Iyo Torishima, which literally means sulfur-taking island, and also from parts in Kyushu. So sulfur was the other big item. So the Ming Dynasty got a lot of valuable products, mostly connected with warfare, through this trade with the Ryukyu Islands.
So again, let's go to the article that you were first introduced to me by one of my karate friends, was The Myth of Ryukyuan Pacifism, which obviously we've just spent a half hour basically already dispelling that myth.
Yes.
And, I said before we started, I've been doing karate now for almost 47 years. I've been to Okinawa numerous times, Japan, been to China. Okay. And when I started karate, who made karate? Oh, farmers made karate. And when I'm 15 years old, I go, oh, that's cool. Farmers created this fighting art. Wow, farmers? That's great, And then as I go on, I get a little bit older and I start asking some questions. My eyes start getting opened up. I become a police officer where I'm actually using my skills, and I'm like, farmers? And then as you get older, you realize, wow, farming is really hard work. Like, when did these guys have time to
Exactly.
create karate? Like, they're farming. Like, even on Amazon now, one of me and my wife's favorite shows is Clarkson's Farm, where Jeremy Clarkson tries to run this farm in Great Britain. Oh my God, the amount of work.
Yes.
God bless, farmers, whatever they deserve everything. God bless them, right? But they had time to create karate. And then I'm like, why would farmers even need karate, right? And then you realize that, obviously there was a military structure within Okinawa. There were trained warriors within Okinawa. Now, are they as highly trained as maybe the top Japanese samurai? Maybe not, but maybe so. Why not, right? Now you're saying that swords were a commodity, right? So who wanted swords? Did farmers need swords? I don't think they needed swords. I think professional warriors need swords, right? So I just find it fascinating how, the old Western thing where when the legend becomes so good, you go with the legend and forget the real story, right? But as I've gotten older, and what's been great now within the world of Okinawan martial arts is the fact that we have several really serious researchers that are kind of shedding light on things. And it may not make some people happy because obviously the legends are a lot cooler, right? We love stories,
Yes.
right? We all love stories. Doesn't matter what kind of history, we love stories, right? But like for me, I always feel that the history, warts and all, is what I want because it shows their true humanity and what they did. And now we know in karate, and again, I don't know if in your research you've seen this, that they had the Ryukyu house in a part of China where a lot of the Okinawans would go to and stay. And they would study Chinese, they would study various things. And again, these people were not farmers. They were part of the aristocracy, merchants that had money. And now it's come to us to understand that what a lot of them were doing is they were paying Chinese martial arts masters to teach them martial arts. And, so it's just interesting how everything's kind of turned around. And like when you're talking about Okinawan history, like we say, oh, it's the land of peace, love, and kindness, right? But one of the other researchers, Mario McKenna, sent me the stats, the crime stats for the late 1800s to the early 1900s in Okinawa. And you look at the actual number of crimes and you say, "Oh, that's not so bad." But then when you look at the population and see that number of crimes, it's like, "Oh, wait a second. That's pretty high." So again, like now the Okinawa we go to is a very different Okinawa, right? But I think when you're talking about these ancient times, there was a warrior caste. And some of them say in Okinawa they were called samurai. Is that the right pronunciation?
Samurai.
Yeah.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
again, so obviously, it's a serious warrior culture. And how long would you say that warrior culture went on for in Okinawa?
Okay. Well, yeah, there's so many things you brought up that are that are fascinating, and they're all interrelated. Um, all right. So yeah, I think that the warrior culture, if we could use that term, I'm not even sure if that's exactly the right term,
Okay.
but it will derive from originally from these rough and rowdy pirates. I mean, this was the front. Another way to look at the Ryukyu Islands, it's the frontier.
Right.
It's frontier of Japan.
The Wild West of Japan.
Yeah, exactly. Where the criminals on the run, the the merchants who didn't make it somewhere else but thought, well, let me give it another shot, or the people who think I can make some money here, and it's highly competitive, and the resources are extremely sparse. One of an entire chapter in here is about agriculture, where I basically say this was not an agricultural society, despite all the things, even to this day, historians say it couldn't have been. The soil, and I go into all this gory detail on why. And so, if you're a farmer in Okinawa, you're really working hard because you've got nature stacked against you. So it's this trading and raiding society in which the political unit, say in the 1300s, 1400s, is a harbor and fortress pair. So there's a harbor that's good enough anchorage for at least a medium-sized ship, and above it, about a kilometer or two above and inland, is a fortress. The typical term for the generic term would be gusuku, and so you can still find these ruins. There are hundreds of them in Okinawa alone, and you stand up on this, the either the ruins, or some of them have been reconstructed,
Right.
so, and look down, and there you see the harbor. And this was the political unit. There were no, you don't have these little kingdoms. You have these dozens of major harbor fortress pairs, as well as dozens of minor ones that sometimes cooperated with each other, sometimes attacked each other because that's a better harbor over there. We want it. And it was this wild and woolly kind of a situation. So that's, if you want, you could call it a warrior culture, or I call it a trading and raiding society. But in any case, it was rough and tumble. So a frontier society, Wild
Right.
West.
Obviously, there's a martial component to it.
Yes.
It's like the same thing we say about criminals, that criminals have their own martial techniques, right?
Yes.
And if you're talking about the type of competition you're talking about, and you're talking about that time frame in history, obviously it's the strong.
Yeah.
The strong.
Right. Yes.
It's
the
not
strong crush the weak.
Yeah, it's not. It's not. Well, let's sit down and talk about this. It's right.
Right.
Yeah,
Exactly.
comes much
Yeah.
later, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. If two groups are cooperating, it's because that's more profitable for them
right.
than
They're
in their
both getting a
minds.
mutual
Yeah.
benefit.
Right.
Right. Right.
Right. Exactly. So, all right. So we go from that into a situation where the trade king based in the Shuri Naha area gradually does become a king in the usual sense of the word, conquers the island of Okinawa, or at least mostly, pacifies it, gets local strong men to bow down to him, and conquers the other Ryukyu Islands. It's this very long-lived king Shoshin who actually came to the throne at the tender age of 12 as part of he had to kill his uncle and do it. Well, it's a long story.
Right.
It's a complicated family drama, and it probably took him about 20 years, he and his partisans, to actually get control over the extended family and then move out from there. So, so this guy Shoshin starts off as one of these kind of Wako pirate chieftain types and ends up as the king of a real kingdom / empire. And so from that point, then it's a shift from being pirates yourself to defending against pirates, but still pirates are crucially important in the process.
Right.
And that's where you start to get this formal buildup of the harbor of Naha with cannon and the construction of artillery platforms that narrow the harbor down so the ships have to come through between these two platforms, one of which is still extant today, and the other one has been bulldozed away to make the harbor wider. And then a road that connects all the major arsenals and fortifications, including all the way up to Shirdi Castle, a specific protocol for marshaling soldiers. And so like these regions will produce soldiers who will defend the southern shore. You guys are going to defend this area, a coordinated defense plan. All that is in place by about 1550, 1560 or so.
Okay.
So you have this very well defended. Essentially, this kingdom does is it puts all its eggs in one basket of the defense of Naha Harbor. And there's two downsides to that. One is, of course, what if somebody attacks overland from somewhere else? Another is that although, yes, we're very well equipped to beat back a blatant naval attack, the pirates are coming. Here we go. Get ready. Get your cannons aimed. Fire. And there was one such battle in the war in 1609 that was similar to that, in which the Ryukyuans won. It was the only battle they won in that war. But what happens if you're just getting a bunch of shady merchants coming in, and they have to come in because when so then we get back to China. Chinese investiture envoys come into town to invest the kings, and that starts in the 1530s. They bring with them all the sorts of merchants and merchandise that has to be sold, and there's way more than can be purchased locally. So we have to invite all these Japanese merchants in who are armed to the teeth. They're merchants, they're pirates, and they just come swarming in, and we can't. In principle, they were supposed to put their swords in some storehouse, but they didn't, and there was no way to enforce that. So you can't really defend against that sort of a situation.
Right.
And so those are the two weaknesses, and will eventually will cause this kingdom and empire to be defeated in war with Satsuma in 1609.
So now, can I ask you a question about that, the Satsuma? So was there a first attempt at invasion by Satsuma, which was repelled, and then a second attempt, which was the one that was successful?
Yeah. Okay. If you read my article, you might get that impression, but that's not accurate.
Okay.
So what I was looking at were Chinese records, no, Korean records. I'm sorry, Korean records in which a Ryukyuan envoy named Doan, who's actually a Japanese Buddhist priest from Hakata, but he's working as a Ryukyuan envoy. So this constant intermixture with the rest of Japan. He goes to Korea and is being interviewed by some Korean official who's writing down what he says, and he says that there are constant raids or incursions from Satsuma, although he's not clear exactly who's doing it or whatever.
Right.
And Ryukyuan forces are victorious in those endeavors 9 out of 10 times.
Okay.
So it's somewhere in the Tokara Islands. This is where this tension is military tension.
Right.
Yeah, and so he describes the Tokara Islands as being divided half between Satsuma forces and half Ryukyu, and he uses the word wasa in the Korean term for which refers to Gaja, and there's an actual island, Gajajima, the little island of Gaja, and so I took that literally to mean that island that was described as half under Ryukyuan control, half under Satsuma control, which actually is ridiculous. It's not even inhabited today because it's so small.
Right.
This term also simply meant the Tokara Islands in general, and so it just means that some of them are under predominantly Ryukyuan influence, some are under Satsuma influence. It's a zone where the two influences merge, and there's sometimes military tension. It also was a major slave trading area for that same reason. So the article is a little bit misleading in that regard. And in the subsequent books, I've expanded. This one has a section on that, and this one as well. So yeah, and that we're in what time are we talking about? Late 1400s, or approximately is when he was describing these things.
So it's interesting to me because I also do Japanese martial arts. So I study Katori Shinto-ryu, which is a very old style of swordsmanship. I've studied Sosui Shitsuru Jiu-Jitsu, which is actually they were part of the Satsuma, and that goes back to around 1650. You know, it's kind of like the dates you talked about. It's around 16. No one knows when these martial arts were actually created or developed. But you know, I am always fascinated by the fact that even if there were skirmishes between the two, the fact that the Okinawans came out on top in any of them would be pretty impressive because of the fact that Japan was such a martial dominant culture. You know, I mean,
well, okay, but there's a little more to it though, in the sense that when we say Japan, we tend to think of some kind of a singular state or whatever. Right. But if we were talking about the 1490s or throughout almost all the 1500s, like just until the 1580s, it's completely.
It's all over
there's
the
no
place.
Central government.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's all these different domains, and they're all fighting with each other and jockeying for better position and better profits. And so a very similar situation is actually going on all the way through the Ryukyu Islands and up into the Japanese
Japan.
islands as well. Okay. So it's now that when the War of 1609 comes along, then the Tokugawa Bakufu is in place. It gives permission to Satsuma to do the war. It's a much bigger set of resources up there in the north.
It's more organized. It's more organized.
Yeah. Yes.
So,
and in the meantime, the Ryukyu Islands have been suffering from a huge reduction in their traditional trade.
Okay.
In part because of changes in the Ming Dynasty, so they're getting weaker as the 1500s go on. Okay. And Japan will eventually get organized and become somewhat united.
So basically, the trade was going on between Korea, China,
yes.
Japan.
Yes.
So when we look at something like Shuri Castle, it doesn't look like your Japanese castle.
Right.
So it looks almost like it's a combination of a few different cultures.
Yes. Yeah. Shuri Castle itself is a little bit like some Japanese castles. I suspect there's a little bit of a later, or maybe just by random choice, whatever.
Right.
But if we look at every other, and Shuri to a large extent, even Shuri Castle, but certainly all the other major gusuku or castles, in other words, and including the ones that are now UNESCO heritage sites.
Right.
You look at them, and we know when they were created. So that the walled gusuku start going up in the early 1300s. We don't find anything before then. Maybe some little bit small ones, but the big ones with the big impressive walls that kind of snake along the topography. So where do those come from? They're not from Japan. They precede the era of Japanese castles, and they don't look like Japanese castles,
right?
As you've noted. do they look like Chinese walled cities? And the answer is no. Um, the Chinese walled cities were created from uh, uh, bricks that were literally made in brickyards. So you'd have these molds into which you'd pour the clay and create these uniform sized bricks and build these walls around cities. Moreover, the Chinese walled cities were almost always in low-lying areas where there was water sources and with the city and so forth. Now go up to Korea. Oh yeah, Korean mountain fortresses, of which there are thousands that still extant, identical
Huh.
to Ryukyu and Gusku. And in fact, there's
Interesting.
three major types of masonry in the Korean fortresses. They correspond to exactly the three types of masonry in Okinawan and Ryukyuan, because they're not just Okinawa masonry, and they're even essentially called the same thing. They're virtually identical. I like to show people pictures and say, which is Korean, which is Okinawan. Can't tell. Um, so that's where they come from, and that and so many other things come from Korea, which is where all this pirate activity is going on. Half these so-called waka are themselves Koreans. There's a major Korean community in Okinawa in the 1400s. There's all these Koreans being sold and repatriated, sold to brokers who then repatriate them to Korea through Naha. So there's all this Korean influence that gets completely washed out of most of understandings of sort of deeper Ryukyuan history kind of and culture, partly because it's really by the late 1500s that's kind of off the there's no that trait has faded away.
Yeah, it's interesting because within the martial arts of Okinawa, Korea is never even a thought.
Yeah,
Like it's
right.
never even brought up. You know, and one of the things I believe, I don't know how you feel about this, but so the Satsuma had a presence obviously on the island. Uh, I would think at some point they're probably creating friendships. I know we have in the one of the early martial arts pioneers of Okinawa. He became a lineage holder in Jigenryu swordsmanship, and Jigenryu is a big style from Kyushu.
Yes.
Um, so another thing that's kind of not talked about as much is the possibility of the influence of Japanese martial training on Okinawan karate. Um,
Yes.
and it's same thing. So I think, again, with you saying the three, the Korean connection, the Chinese connection, the Japanese connection, to me, common sense would say that, they all have pretty deep martial traditions. I would think there was influences on the Okinawan so-called fighting arts, however you want to look at it, whether it's the pirates training to be able to fight if they're attacked or whatever it is. But I can't see where there's not this kind of hodgepodge and getting different things from different guys, incorporating into that. It's just fascinating to me, Whereas I think the modern thing is especially since Okinawa is now officially part of Japan, is they try to say karate is Japanese, which it isn't, right? And again, though, I think that karate has a lot of different influences that I think we kind of overlook. There's the Chinese, and now I'm thinking, okay, well, the Korean influence. Now I'm thinking, okay, maybe I need to pick up some Korean martial history books where their type of warfare and whatnot to see what they were doing. Um,
Yeah.
because again, it's just fascinating, and as well as I that a lot comes out of martial conflict. Um, Technology comes out of martial conflict. I mean, a lot of things,
Exactly.
we don't like to think about it, but a lot of
Yes.
technology comes out of martial conflict. And so it's just fascinating to me though that this small chain of islands out in the middle of nowhere. I
Yeah.
mean, you know, again, they almost try to downplay, I think, and limit what the actual historic is. And I think that's a huge mistake because the stuff you're talking about, I mean, it's fascinating. Like to me, it shows Okinawa in a completely different light, you know. So
Yes.
can I ask you a question? What's your feeling on George Kerr's book?
Well,
You know, I know
I
it's written,
yeah.
you know,
Okay, so let me, yeah, right. That's a good question. To, I mean, that's the first book I read, and probably the
right,
first book you read.
right,
Everybody read, and
right,
it's immensely popular,
right,
immensely influential. It probably will be 20 years from now, because it tells a story that we want to hear.
right,
I remember reading that. Isn't that cute? Nice? Almost like, isn't that cute? This little kingdom where everyone is just so happy and getting along. Why can't we get along here? You know,
right.
it's just that's a but then I would think to myself, was it really that? Yeah, I don't know. I'm a little
So
skeptical. You know, I always had the
so
skepticism, and
I'll give you a book that's the same thing in karate. There's a book, Weaponless Warriors, written by Richard Kim, which again, when I was 15 and I read that book, oh my God, these guys were like superheroes.
yes,
I was
right,
like, oh, these stories were like, I mean, I still remember some of them. And sometimes I'll take the book out just to read a chapter. But again, now I'm reading it, realizing a lot of it's fiction.
yeah, yeah.
So
Um,
I think if
you
you,
know,
you know, and again, that I can't really blame George Kerr because again,
I mean,
he's asking people and they're telling him and he's believing what they're telling him. And how is
right,
he supposed to research it? So I guess we owe him a debt of gratitude to actually make an attempt so that
yeah,
Western speaking people could have an idea, you know?
yeah. However, now he acknowledges this in his bibliography, but there was already a book-length English language report, essentially a narrative history of Okinawa that was produced by the U.S. military, or I don't know exactly what branch of the military, but
Okay.
the War Information Services, in conjunction with the Battle of Okinawa and the subsequent occupation. You know, as you can imagine, they said, well, let's get the history of this place together, and so that's his Kerr's narrative is a rewritten version of that.
Okay.
Yeah. So he wasn't the first. It
Okay.
was some government bureaucrats who were probably relying heavily on some Japanese, people who work with them who were like,
Right.
I don't, and
Right.
and so and that story was itself dependent on the official histories that I mentioned that were produced between
Okay.
1650 and 1750. Um, so there's kind of this lineage you can construct of sort of the English language versions of Ryukyuan history, and it actually doesn't start with George Kerr, although he's this big. He writes it, publishes it in an easy to accessible form,
Right.
and off it goes out there to the world. Um, so I
Well,
was,
I think I think we see this a lot though within history. I think the early, history, I think a lot of it is obviously, mostly verbal. And then as people become more sophisticated and do more research and really figure out how to do the research, um, I think you realize that things are different. And I think you see it across all kinds of history. Um,
yeah,
you know, uh, I
yeah,
think it's good. I think it's good that there's guys like yourself. There's guys like some of the karate historians really trying to lift the veil on the fake stuff. Like, okay, well, like,
yeah,
okay, it sounds very cool. Like, oh yeah, I'd love it to be this, but it's just not the case. And what's the quote? Was it during the Napoleonic Wars? Someone had told Napoleon about the Ryukyus that there's this magical island that,
yes,
there's never any war and it's
yeah,
always been peaceful. They've never known war, you know,
right.
you
He
know,
just, he just said nonsense.
right, right,
I mean, he didn't take him apparently any contemplation or anything. He says absolute nonsense,
right, right.
impossible, and he was right.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
mean, human history is about conflict, and
yeah,
I'd love to see us get away from that, and it has gotten better. It's still not great
yes,
though. Um, and like my Chinese martial arts master, one of the things he said to me one time is it's very difficult to change an ancient mindset, to get them to change a way of thinking. Um, and like again, you see it in Okinawa. I mean, even some of the senior Okinawan karate people still want to hang on to this um, peace, love, and happiness idea, and that
yeah.
oh yeah, farmers created this, and oh yeah, the weapons were all farming tools, and I'm like, okay,
I,
who the
I heard
who? Who were the
I heard
farmers
that too.
fighting? Right.
Yeah.
Who were the farmers fighting? I mean,
Yeah.
you know, and meanwhile now we know that these guys, the aristocrats, and who obviously were upper echelon within whatever form of government we're talking about, were the ones that had the money, could go and train and learn. Um, and when you had samurai there that were there and staying there, obviously, I'm sure some of the Okinawans developed friendships and they were training together and learning different things from a martial standpoint.
Oh,
And
yes. Yes.
like you talk about the pirates, I mean, when someone wants to take your property, you're gonna you're gonna learn how to prevent them from doing that.
Right.
And
Right.
you know, and
Or
then,
if you want to take someone's property.
right, you're going to learn how to be able to do that
Yeah.
well. So you're risking your life less, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, it's a fascinating little island.
Yeah.
I mean,
There's
yeah.
there's a couple of things that you mentioned that they like, have struck me and made me think of things. And one of them is just that I have this book right here on the top. I'm actually writing a book-length version of the article, The Myth
Oh,
of
okay,
Ryukyu and Pacifism. So it's going to, go into all details about the law codes, the
okay,
crimes you mentioned,
okay,
the all the wars, the
right,
military preparations, and so forth. But so this is Miyakojima Kyuki, and it's like so ancient record of Miyakojima, modern translation. So it's
okay,
nicely translated with notes by some expert, and it's all legends. And it's the earliest material we have on Miyako Island and nearby islands. It's all legend, but there's this pattern like I'm looking for the cover of it, the dust jacket, because it shows these two guys. One guy shooting an arrow and the other's got his sword, and it's all
right,
warfare. But how does one? And it's all local people based over here. This one guy and wants this other guy's land. They go to war, and I've actually literally walked through this island and to all these places. And how do they, in fact, win their battles? Always by trickery. But I mean, you know, how would you, if you're in the military today, you're going to say, hey, we're coming to attack you, get ready. Of course,
right,
it's always a sneak attack if at
right,
all possible. So it's, I'm going to lull my opponent into thinking that this is a friendly archery contest, and then I'm going to turn around and shoot him,
right.
or bring him to my house to this banquet, get him drunk, and then some guy's going to stab him in the back, or poison him, or it's every one of
Well,
them
it's like
is that.
I'm a big Old West history guy, and we have this idea of these gunfights where the two guys square off in the center of town, and they
Yeah,
both do their quick draw.
yeah,
Utter nonsense. I mean,
yeah,
the guy's getting shot in the back. He's shooting the guy when he's not looking. I
yeah,
mean, there's none of this fair play involved,
yeah.
and conflict has always been that, you know.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah. One other thing I did is knowing that this was coming up. I didn't have a lot of time, but so let me just look at the basic history of karate.
Okay.
And it's like in a Japanese website or something from some major organization. So I actually printed out the literal lineages, like the shurite,
Okay.
bunch of people and
Uh-huh.
so forth, and so that one supposedly was founded by a guy named Matsumura Sokon, who
Right.
lived between 1809 and 1899.
Right.
And then it's this lineage. Actually, I was noticed. Oh, I think this is the Ishinryu guy, Shimabukuro Tatsuo.
Yes.
Yeah, and
He'd
so
fall under Kion Chotoku.
yep. And here's right before him is Kyan, uh, uh, and um, and then there's Motobu Choki
Right.
as well. And then before them was Itosu.
Right.
Looks like
Tosu Anko.
Anko.
Right.
Yeah. So you get that lineage. So I just to kind of familiarize myself with the basics. I've got Nahate and
Right.
the others all printed out here. Um, but when I read the descriptions of these, I mean, it could well be legendary founders. But
Right.
anyway, none of them are farmers.
No.
Well, although okay, some of them may have been a little had some, so Matsumura was an aristocrat,
Right.
and most of these others were. Um, and in these, again, this very quick reading of this
Right.
Japanese summary of karate history, yes, they are all dealing. They know people from Satsuma. They're exchanging techniques. There's all sorts of Japanese and especially Satsuma mediated stuff that gets into this. So yeah, and what
And
you were
and
saying
and
is just reminded me of what I just was reading the last couple of days.
and so, were you aware that there was the Ryukyu house in part of China?
Yes, yeah,
Okay.
my books mention it
Yeah.
in
So
one way
again,
or
that's
another.
again, and so are you familiar with the Bubishi?
The what?
The Bubishi. So
Um,
the Bubishi is a book
mhm.
that Patrick McCarthy translated several years ago. Um, it's they believe it came from China, but they're really
Okay.
not sure, right? Um, but now there is a theory out there that when these guys were at the Ryukyu house, they supposedly would invite these Chinese martial artists and they would pay them to teach them for a month. And then in that month, they would learn techniques. And
Yeah.
if they liked the guy, they might extend another month. And maybe one guy might have taught them a form, but most of them were just learning fighting techniques.
Yes.
That's why a lot of the Okinawan kata you can't find that form in China, right?
Yeah. Right.
So now there's a theory put out there that the Bubishi is basically it's a notebook. So what they were doing was they were either paying an artist or whatever, and I could show you. I have it here, the app here. So this will give you an idea of what the Bubishi would look like.
Oh wow, that is fascinating.
Okay, so
Yeah.
this is
Okay.
a
I have to get
phenomenal
that.
phenomenal book.
Yeah.
And
All right.
Patrick McCarthy's, the two of them together, phenomenal.
Yeah.
So this book's been floating around in Okinawa in various forms for quite a while. No one was really sure of the origin. There's the thing of the 36 families supposedly that came to Okinawa
Supposedly.
from China, but now that's kind of like, right? So,
You're right.
so anyway, they thought it might just be a notebook where they paid an artist, said, "Hey, illustrate these techniques. So when we go
Yeah.
back to Okinawa,
Yeah.
we have a reference."
Right.
So it's just fascinating to me that I think, again, I think Okinawan karate has been a product of several cultures. It's not
Yes.
just, you know,
Yes.
it's not just Chinese. It's not
Yeah.
just this. It's not just so it's
Right.
just fascinating to me what was
Yeah.
going on.
Um, in the 1600s and 1700s, 1800s, there were these official embassies that would go from Okinawa to China and all the way to Beijing eventually. Um, but in addition to that, at this Ryukyu-kan or Ryukyu house in Fuzhou, um, there was a constant group of Okinawans who were there either at their own expense or with some subsidy, especially so the government in Shuri might send them over there to learn how to make white sugar or how to learn a surgical technique to repair a hair lip. These are real examples,
Right.
or all kinds of technical arts. So there's constantly a few Okinawans in China, in southern China, learning technical arts and typically paying some local Chinese expert to show them how to do it and so forth. And so these martial arts I think are exactly in the same category. It's the same group of people. Some of them either as a side thing or just
Right.
as their main intention go over there and learn local Southern Chinese martial arts.
Right. So we know Kian Chotoku's father was third advisor to the king, to the last king.
Yeah,
So again, obviously influenced the family has money. So that's why we know Kian was in Fuzhou,
yeah,
and again, so that's fascinating that they were going there also to learn many other things, which I knew language. They was studying Chinese language and different things, but
yeah,
even surgery and that kind of stuff is yeah, it's fascinating.
yeah.
And they've recently actually made that house a museum.
Very nice.
They've made it a museum there, and its connection with Okinawan karate. So, and I get it. They want to draw the karate guys there to for
Yes.
tourism and whatnot. But yeah, it's fascinating to me now how karate has become this just global. I mean, it's amazing.
Yeah.
And Okinawa has really tried to reclaim their birthright because, again, Big Brother Japan kind of overshadowed it for a while. Um,
Right.
but as someone who's done Okinawan karate for a really long time and other arts, there's a huge difference between real Okinawan karate and the Japanese karate, biomechanically how it's done. Um,
Yeah.
and the Okinawans, again, and now karate's become like the number one tourism attraction in Okinawa. They actually have karate tourism offices set up.
Yeah. I just happened to have been in Okinawa this past August,
Okay.
and looking often just in very obscure locations, poking around to make sure there are no snakes, and then
Yeah.
taking pictures
Yeah.
of fortification ruins for this current book. That's going to be the expansion of the article into a book.
Right.
And on my last day, after I'd done all the hard work, I said I can go around in the Naha area and photograph all the whatever's left of the defensive system. And so anyway, so I went up to one of the castles that's inland. And anyway, there's this, and I forgot the exact name of the building, but there's this major martial arts kind of complex that you kind of go through to get to this. And it just so happened there was apparently a big tournament or something, because busload after busloads of people are getting off in their
Right.
karate outfits, and and just kind of walking past them. I was actually kind of hurriedly walking past them because I wanted to get out of all this crowd. But I was hearing a bunch of different languages, and
Right.
I was witnessing exactly this phenomenon where people must have come from all over the world converging on Okinawa for this big tournament.
Right. And they opened a few years ago what's called the Karate Kaikan, which is dedicated to karate and kobudo.
Yeah,
And they have a museum in there. They have a training area.
yeah.
They do
That must have been the place
that
that.
could have been the place. They
Yeah,
do
yeah,
historical research, and it's right around the corner from the Okinawan Budokan,
yeah.
which the Budokan opened in '97. I know I was there. I led the demonstration for Ishinryu Karate for my teacher school. So yeah, it's just fascinating though to see like karate's become now so important to the economy of Okinawa. And as you know, it's still one of the, if not the poorest, one of the poorest prefectures in Japan.
Yeah, it
Um,
is the poorest by most measures.
yeah, and so so listen, I'm not a big karate sport guy. That's not why I do it. But I have no problem if that's an aspect that helps keep it alive, and if it helps the Okinawan people to earn a living, great. I mean, I wouldn't knock anybody for earning a living. But so listen, I got to tell you, this has been great. I really appreciate you coming on.
Yeah,
I'm
the
gonna
pleasure was all mine.
Yeah, so I'm gonna work my way through this book. Again, listen, okay, to my karate guys. Okay, break open the wallet, get this book, and start reading it. Okay, because I'm telling you, even the beginning, I'm just sitting there going, oh, oh, all right. So, you know, um, I think the book's great. Now I see you have all these other books. I'm gonna make sure I get them too and work my way through all of them. Because again, I think this type of historical information helps me to understand the martial side of more. You know,
Yeah,
because again, a lot of times with the martial side, it's like you said, legends, and a lot of times there's some basis in fact in a legend,
yes,
but it's hard to sift through sometimes. It's
right,
it's a
right.
lot easier when things are clear. So I really appreciate you coming on. And listen, when the next book comes out, let's do this again. Reach
Let's
out,
do
let
this
me
again. Yes,
know.
you will love the next book,
Yeah, man. Yeah,
especially.
and again, one of the things I say about this podcast is, I don't really care if anybody watches because I get to talk to people that I find interesting that I never would have gotten a chance to meet you. This has been great. I learned a lot, which is great, right? So yeah, and like I said, this podcast will drop next week. So I really appreciate you coming on, and definitely when the new book comes out, let me know, and we'll set this up again and do it again.
Very good.
All
All
right.
right.
All right. So Kate, take care.
Take care.
All right. Bye bye.
Hey, goodbye.
So I hope you enjoyed my interview with Professor Gregory Smits. I mean, I was it blew me away, some of the things he was talking about. Just gives you really an understanding of Okinawa and the Ryukyu Islands in a different way. Here's his book, all right? Ryukyu Islands, A New History from the Stone Age to the Present. As you can see, it's a pretty comprehensive book. He's got several other ones out there, as he showed the covers during the podcast, so consider picking those up too. I think that give you a real interesting history of Okinawa and the true history of Okinawa, not the kind of myths that, it's like with karate, right? We've all been told karate was created by farmers, and then, wow, what do you mean? It wasn't? Okay. So please click that like, share, subscribe button, consider becoming a monthly member, and I'll see you in the next podcast. Take care.